The first thing I noticed was the smell of fresh-cut flowers and the sound of a cash box clicking open. It was 7:14 a.m. on a Saturday, and I was standing in my own backyard in my robe, holding a coffee mug that had gone cold in my hand, staring at a folding table covered in mason jars of honey and handwritten price tags. The table was inside my great-aunt's smokehouse. The door was wide open. The padlock I had installed 3 years ago was gone, replaced by a shiny brass hook and eye latch that someone had screwed directly into the hand-hewn oak doorframe. Through the open doorway, I could see more folding tables stacked against the interior brick wall, a coil of orange extension cord, and a laminated sign that read, Willow Creek HOA Farmers Market. Vendor check-in here, propped against my great-aunt's original iron curing hooks. My hands were shaking, but not from the cold. I set the coffee mug down on the stone step, pulled my phone out of my robe pocket, and started taking pictures. Every angle, the door, the latch, the tables, the sign, the screw holes in the frame. I took 47 photos before I heard the voice behind me. Oh good, you're finally up. I need you to move your truck so the vendors can park closer to the lawn. I turned around. Patricia Bellingham was walking toward me across the dew-soaked grass, wearing a cream-colored linen blazer and carrying a clipboard with a yellow legal pad clamped to it. She was 62 years old, the president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association, and she was smiling at me like she had just done me a favor. Patricia, I said, and my voice came out steadier than I expected. Why is there a folding table inside my smokehouse? She glanced at the little brick building, then back at me, and her smile didn't waver. That old thing? It's been empty for years. We needed a central booth for market day, and it's perfectly positioned near the common lawn. Honestly, it's been sitting there like decor anyway. You should be thanking us for putting it to use. I didn't answer right away. I looked past her toward the street, where a white HOA pickup truck was parked with its hazard lights blinking. Two men I didn't recognize were unloading more tables from the bed. A woman in a sun hat was setting up a tent near the community mailbox. Bunting had been strung between the lampposts. The farmer's market was happening in 90 minutes, and my great-aunt Margaret's smokehouse, built in 1937, listed in the county heritage inventory, and deeded to my family before the HOA even existed, had been turned into the welcome booth. Patricia tapped her clipboard with a manicured nail. Now, about your truck. The vendors need that access lane clear by 8. I've already had to explain to 3 of them that the homeowner on lot 47 is being a little difficult about sharing the common area. So let's not make this worse. She had no idea that the document sitting in my fireproof safe inside the house would end her entire claim before the first jar of honey was sold. Before I explain what happened next, tell me where you're watching from. I'm curious who's out there listening to this kind of neighborhood insanity. My name is Daniel Mercer. I'm 41 years old, a civil engineer by training, and I've lived in this house on Lot 47 of the Willow Creek subdivision for 11 years. The house itself is unremarkable, a 1990s colonial revival, with beige siding and a front porch that needs repainting. But the property came with something that no other lot in the development had, a small, rectangular, single-room brick outbuilding, with a steep gabled roof and a heavy oak door, set back about 40 feet from the main house, near the property line that borders the community retention pond. The Smokehouse. My great-aunt Margaret built it with her own hands, alongside my great-uncle Henry, during the summer of 1937. Back then, this land wasn't a subdivision. It was a 60-acre farm with a farmhouse, a barn, a chicken coop, and a smokehouse, where Margaret cured hams and bacon, using recipes she had learned from her mother, who had learned them from her mother before that. The farmhouse and barn were torn down in 1986 when the developer bought the land. The chicken coop collapsed in a storm in 1992. But the smokehouse survived because it was built like a fortress. Double-thick brick walls, a slate roof, a concrete floor poured over packed gravel, and oak beams salvaged from a demolished railroad depot. When the developer subdivided the property into 48 lots, he drew the plat map so that the smokehouse fell entirely within the boundaries of Lot 47. My parents bought the lot and built this house in 1994. I inherited it in 2012 after my mother passed, and I've been here ever since. I'm not a sentimental man by nature. I'm an engineer. I think in load calculations and drainage gradients and soil compaction rates. But that smokehouse matters to me in a way that's hard to explain. When I was a kid, my great-aunt Margaret would bring me out there during family visits and show me the iron hooks, the curing racks, the smoke stains on the ceiling bricks. and she'd tell me stories about the hogs they raised and the winters they survived, and the neighbors who would come from 3 counties away to buy her bacon. She died in 2001 at the age of 94, but I still have her recipe box. It's in my kitchen, in the drawer next to the stove. I've never smoked a ham in my life, but I keep the smokehouse maintained. I repointed the brickwork in 2016. I replaced the roof slates that cracked during a hailstorm in 2019. I keep the door oiled and the interior swept, and a small framed photo of Margaret and Henry on the back wall. It's not a storage shed. It's not a garden folly. It's a piece of my family history, and it sits on my deeded property, and I have never once given anyone permission to enter it. Which brings me back to Patricia Bellingham and her clipboard. The first violation happened 3 weeks before market day. It was a Thursday afternoon in late September, and I had come home from work early because a bridge inspection in the next county had been canceled due to rain. I pulled into my driveway around 2:30 p.m. and noticed a white Mercedes GLE parked on the street in front of my house. I didn't recognize it, but that wasn't unusual. The neighborhood had turned over a lot in the past few years, with younger families moving in and upgrading their cars. I went inside, changed out of my work boots, made a sandwich, and was about to sit down and review some soil reports when I heard a sharp knock on my front door. I opened it to find a woman I had seen at HOA meetings but never spoken to directly. She was tall, with silver blonde hair cut in a precise bob, and she was holding a clipboard with the HOA logo printed on the back. She wore a navy blazer over a white blouse, and her reading glasses hung from a beaded chain around her neck. "Mr. Mercer?" she said. And it wasn't really a question. "I'm Patricia Bellingham, HOA president. I'm conducting a community standards review, and I need to discuss your outbuilding." I leaned against the doorframe. "My smokehouse? Is that what you call it?" She glanced down at her clipboard. "The board has been reviewing common area assets ahead of the fall farmers market, and your outbuilding has come up as a potential resource. It's positioned adjacent to the retention pond common area, and frankly, it's been sitting unused for as long as anyone can remember. We'd like to discuss repurposing it for community events." I took a bite of my sandwich and chewed slowly before answering. "It's not a common area asset. It's on my property. It's deeded to me. And it's not unused. I maintain it." Patricia smiled, and it was the kind of smile that suggested she had dealt with difficult homeowners before and had a process for it. "Mr. Mercer, I understand you feel a sense of ownership, but the board has reviewed the plat maps, and the structure sits within the common area setback zone. The HOA covenants clearly state that any structure within 50 feet of a common area boundary may be subject to community use provisions. I'm not here to argue with you. I'm here to notify you that the board will be voting on a resolution to designate the outbuilding as a community market booth for the upcoming farmers market, and we'd appreciate your cooperation." I finished my sandwich. I wiped my hands on a napkin. I looked at Patricia Bellingham and said, very calmly, "Show me the covenant language." Her smile flickered. "I'm sorry?" "The covenant language. The specific section that says a deeded structure on private property within 50 feet of a common area can be commandeered by the HOA. I'd like to read it." She flipped a page on her clipboard, then another. "I don't have the full covenant document with me, but I can assure you." "Then I'll wait," I said. "You can email me the relevant section, and I'll review it. Until then, the smokehouse stays locked, and no one enters it without my permission. Is there anything else?" Patricia's smile had tightened into something more like a grimace. "I'll have the board secretary send you the documentation. But I should warn you, Mr. Mercer, that non-compliance with board resolutions can result in fines and liens. The HOA takes community standards very seriously." "I take my property rights very seriously," I said. "Have a good afternoon." I closed the door. I stood in the hallway for a full minute, listening to her heels click down the front walk and the Mercedes door open and close, and the engine start and fade away. Then I went to my home office, opened my filing cabinet, and pulled out the folder labeled Property, Lot 47, Deed and Survey. I didn't argue with Patricia. I put the conversation in the folder. I wrote down the date, the time, her name, her claim about the 50-foot setback, and her threat about fines and liens. Then I went outside and photographed the smokehouse from every angle, including close-ups of the padlock, the door frame, and the property line markers that the surveyor had installed when I refinanced in 2018. I didn't know exactly what Patricia was planning, but I knew one thing for certain. The HOA covenants for Willow Creek did not contain any language about commandeering private structures near common areas. I had read the covenants cover to cover when I bought the house, and I had reviewed them again when the board tried to fine me for my mailbox color in 2015. I knew what was in there, and I knew what wasn't. The escalation came faster than I expected. 3 days after Patricia's visit, I came home from work to find a yellow notice taped to my front door. It was a formal HOA violation notice, printed on letterhead, citing Section 4.2/Setter of the Community Covenants, and stating that my outbuilding was in violation of common area access and utilization standards. The notice demanded that I attend a compliance hearing the following Tuesday at 7 p.m. at the community clubhouse, and it warned that failure to appear would result in a $200 fine plus $50 per day until the violation was resolved. I read the notice twice. Section 4.2 dealt with homeowner obstruction of common area pathways. It had nothing to do with private structures. The HOA was either misreading their own covenants or deliberately misapplying them. I put the notice in the folder. I photographed it. I wrote down the date and time of the hearing. Then I called my neighbor, Elena Vasquez, who lived 2 doors down and had been on the HOA board briefly before resigning in frustration 2 years ago. Elena answered on the second ring. "Daniel, everything okay? Elena, have you heard anything about the board trying to take over my smokehouse for the farmers market?" There was a long pause. "Oh no, Patricia didn't. She did. She came to my door last week, and now I've got a violation notice. What do you know?" Elena sighed, and I could hear her moving to a quieter room. "Patricia's been talking about the farmers market for months. She wants it to be a signature event for the neighborhood, something that puts Willow Creek on the map. She's been trying to get vendors from 3 counties, and she's been bragging to the board about how she's going to set up a central booth in that charming little brick building by the pond. I told her it was on your property. I told her she couldn't just take it. She said, and I'm quoting here, 'It's been sitting there for 80 years. It's practically community property by now.' I felt a cold, steady anger settle into my chest. She broke the lock, Elena. She put tables inside. She screwed a new latch into the door frame." "She what?" Elena's voice went sharp. "Daniel, that's breaking and entering. That's property damage. You need to call the sheriff." "I'm going to," I said. "But first I'm going to the compliance hearing. I want to hear her say it on the record." The compliance hearing was held in the clubhouse, a beige modular building with fluorescent lights and folding chairs that smelled faintly of carpet cleaner and old coffee. About 30 residents showed up, which was more than usual for a Tuesday night. Word had gotten around. Patricia sat at the front of the room behind a folding table with 2 other board members, a retired accountant named Frank and a real estate agent named Cheryl, who always voted the way Patricia told her to. Patricia was wearing a different blazer this time, charcoal gray, and she had a stack of papers arranged in front of her like a prosecutor preparing for trial. I sat in the back row with a manila folder on my lap. I didn't speak to anyone. I just watched. Patricia called the meeting to order, ran through some routine business about landscaping contracts and pool maintenance, and then she got to my case. "Item 7, she said, and her voice took on a slightly theatrical tone. "Compliance hearing regarding the outbuilding on Lot 47. Mr. Mercer, would you like to come forward?" I stood up and walked to the front of the room. I didn't sit in the chair she indicated. I stood beside the table, facing the residents, and I spoke clearly enough for everyone to hear. "Before we begin, I'd like to clarify something. The structure you're referring to is a historic smokehouse built in 1937 by my great-aunt Margaret. It's on my deeded property. It's been maintained by my family for 3 generations. And 3 days ago, someone removed my padlock, installed a new latch, and placed folding tables inside without my permission. I'd like to know who authorized that." Patricia's expression didn't change, but her fingers tightened around her pen. "Mr. Mercer, this hearing is about your compliance violation, not about—" "It's about my property," I said, "and someone committed trespassing and property damage. I'm asking who authorized it." Frank the accountant shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Cheryl the real estate agent looked at Patricia. Patricia set her pen down. "The board determined that the structure fell within common area usage guidelines. We authorized the maintenance team to prepare it for market day. No damage was done. The latch is an improvement." I heard a few murmurs from the residents behind me. Someone whispered, "She broke his lock?" I reached into my folder and pulled out a printed photograph of the screw holes in the oak door frame. I held it up so everyone could see. This is the door frame of my smokehouse. Those holes were drilled 3 days ago. The door frame is original 1937 oak, hand-hewn by my great-uncle Henry. That's not an improvement. That's damage to a historic structure. Patricia's face flushed slightly. Mr. Mercer, you're being dramatic. It's an old shed. The board has the authority to— Show me the authority, I said. Show me the covenant section that gives you the right to enter my property, break my lock, and use my building. She reached for her stack of papers. She flipped through several pages. She pulled out a printed copy of the covenants and read aloud, Section 4.2. Homeowners shall not obstruct or impede access to common area pathways, walkways, or community facilities. The board may take reasonable action to ensure compliance. She looked up at me triumphantly. Your outbuilding obstructs access to the retention pond common area. The board acted reasonably. I nodded slowly. Section 4.2 frange is about pathways. It says nothing about structures. It says nothing about private buildings. And it certainly doesn't authorize breaking and entering. I turned to face the residents. I've read the covenants, all 47 pages. There is no provision that allows the board to seize private property for community use. There is no 50-foot setback rule. There is no common area usage guideline that applies to deeded structures. Patricia is making this up as she goes along. The murmurs got louder. Frank the accountant was now staring at the table in front of him. Cheryl was whispering urgently to Patricia. Patricia's face had gone from flushed to pale. This hearing is adjourned, she said abruptly. We'll continue this discussion at a later date. No, I said. You issued a violation notice. You called this hearing. You don't get to adjourn it because you're losing the argument. I want a ruling on the record. Is the violation upheld or dismissed? Patricia looked at Frank. Frank looked at Cheryl. Cheryl looked at her phone. The violation is tabled, Patricia said finally, pending further review. That's not a ruling, I said, but I'll accept it for now. I'll be documenting everything, and if anyone from the HOA sets foot on my property again without my permission, I'll be filing a police report for trespassing. I walked back to my seat, picked up my folder, and left the clubhouse. Behind me, I could hear the room erupt into conversation. The investigation started that night. I didn't trust Patricia to back down. People like her don't back down when they're embarrassed. They double down. I knew she would try to find some other angle, some other justification, some other way to claim that my smokehouse belonged to the community. So I decided to make sure that when she did, I would have something she couldn't argue with. I started with the deed. I pulled out the original 1994 deed from when my parents bought Lot 47, and I read every line. The property description was standard, a meets and bounds survey describing the lot boundaries, with no exceptions or easements noted, except for a utility easement along the frontage road. The smokehouse wasn't mentioned by name, but it was clearly within the described boundaries. Next, I pulled out the survey I had commissioned in 2018 when I refinanced. The surveyor had marked the smokehouse on the plat, and the boundary line between Lot 47 and the retention pond common area ran a full 12 feet behind the back wall of the building. The smokehouse wasn't on the edge of my property. It was solidly inside it. I put both documents in the folder. Then I went deeper. I drove to the county recorder's office on my lunch break the next day. The recorder's office was in the basement of the county courthouse, a quiet room with fluorescent lights and the smell of old paper and dust. A clerk named Mrs. Halpern, who had worked there for 37 years and knew every file in the place, helped me pull the original subdivision plat from 1986. The plat showed all 48 lots, the retention pond, the common areas, and, in a small, neat notation near Lot 47, the words, existing brick outbuilding. The developer had known the smokehouse was there. He had drawn the lot lines specifically to include it. He had not designated it as a common area, a community asset, or a shared structure. It was part of Lot 47, period. I made a copy of the plat. Mrs. Halpern stamped it as a certified copy. I put it in the folder, but I didn't stop there. Something Elena had said was nagging at me. She had mentioned that Patricia had been bragging about the farmers market for months, talking about vendors from 3 counties, about putting Willow Creek on the map. That kind of ambition usually came with paperwork, permits, applications, insurance certificates. If Patricia was organizing a public event with outside vendors, she would have had to file something with the county. I asked Mrs. Halpern if there were any recent permit applications for events at the Willow Creek subdivision. She typed on her computer for a moment, then nodded. There's a special event permit application filed 3 weeks ago by a Patricia Bellingham on behalf of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. Farmers Market, scheduled for October 14th. Approved by the county events office. Can I see it? She printed it out for me. It was a standard form, but one section caught my eye immediately. Under event location and facilities, Patricia had written, Willow Creek Common Lawn and adjacent community booth. Existing brick structure near retention pond. Community booth. She had described my smokehouse as a community booth on an official county permit application. That was a written, sworn statement to the county government claiming that my private property was a community asset. I felt a cold, sharp satisfaction. Patricia had just put her lie in writing, under penalty of perjury, on a government form. I made a copy of the permit application. I put it in the folder. But the real discovery came 2 days later, and it came from a direction I hadn't expected. I was going through some old boxes in my attic, looking for family photos to document the smokehouse's history, when I found a manila envelope I had never seen before. It was addressed to my mother, postmarked 1998, and the return address was the State Historic Preservation Office. Inside was a letter, a certificate, and a small brass plaque. The letter was from a historian named Dr. Eleanor Cross, and it began, Dear Mrs. Mercer, thank you for submitting the Mercer Family Smokehouse for inclusion in the State Heritage Inventory of Historic Agricultural Structures. We are pleased to inform you that the structure has been approved for listing. I read the letter 3 times. My mother had nominated the smokehouse for heritage listing. She had done it quietly, without telling anyone, probably as a way to honor Aunt Margaret after she passed. The certificate confirmed that the smokehouse was listed in the State Heritage Inventory as a contributing agricultural structure of historical significance, and the listing included specific protections, no alterations, demolitions, or modifications without owner approval and Heritage Office review. The brass plaque was small and simple, engraved with the words Mercer Smokehouse, Estate 1937, State Heritage Inventory. My mother had never installed it. Maybe she had meant to and forgotten. Maybe she had decided it would draw too much attention. It didn't matter. What mattered was that the smokehouse wasn't just my private property. It was a listed heritage structure, and any unauthorized alterations, like, say, drilling holes in the original doorframe and installing a new latch, were violations of state preservation guidelines. I called the State Historic Preservation Office the next morning. I explained the situation to a heritage officer named Thomas Park, who listened quietly, and then asked me to send him photos of the damage and copies of the HOA's correspondence. I emailed him everything. The photos of the screw holes, the violation notice, the permit application claiming the smokehouse was a community booth, and the certified plat showing the building on my property. Thomas called me back within 2 hours. Mr. Mercer, he said, and his voice had a certain weight to it. The Mercer Smokehouse is a listed heritage structure. Any unauthorized alterations are a violation of state preservation guidelines. If the HOA has damaged the structure and is using it without your permission, that's a serious matter. I'd like to schedule a site visit. When? I asked. I'm available anytime. How about October 14th? He said. I understand there's an event scheduled that day. I think it would be productive to conduct the inspection while the structure is in use. I smiled for the first time in 3 weeks. October 14th sounds perfect. I didn't tell anyone about the heritage listing. Not Elena, not the neighbors, certainly not Patricia. I let the days pass. I watched from my kitchen window as the HOA maintenance crew set up more tables on the common lawn, strung more bunting, erected a portable stage near the pond. I watched Patricia march around with her clipboard, directing vendors, pointing at my smokehouse, gesturing expansively like she was the mayor of a small town. I watched the screw holes in my great-uncle's oak doorframe get covered by a vinyl banner that read, Willow Creek Farmers Market, welcome. And I waited. The night before the market, I went out to the smokehouse after dark. The new latch was easy to open from the outside. Patricia hadn't even bothered to put a lock on it. I stepped inside and shone my flashlight around. The folding tables were stacked against the wall. The orange extension cord was coiled in the corner. The laminated sign was still propped against the iron curing hooks. And on the back wall, my great-aunt Margaret's framed photo was still there, but someone had turned it face down on the shelf. I picked it up, wiped the dust off the glass, and set it upright again. Then I took out the small brass heritage plaque that my mother had never installed, and I placed it on the shelf next to the photo. I didn't screw it into the wall. I just set it there, where it would catch the morning light. Then I went back inside my house, locked the door, and slept better than I had in weeks. Market day dawned clear and cool. I woke up at 6 a.m., made coffee, and watched from my kitchen window as the vendors arrived. There were more of them than I had expected, maybe 20 stalls in total, selling honey, jam, produce, candles, soap, baked goods, cut flowers. Cars lined the street. Neighbors walked across the lawn with canvas tote bags and paper coffee cups. Patricia was everywhere at once, clipboard in hand, directing traffic, greeting vendors, posing for photos with a local newspaper reporter who had shown up to cover the event. At 7:30 a.m., I got dressed in a clean button-down shirt and khakis. I put my folder, now thick with documents, photos, and certified copies, into a leather satchel. I poured my coffee into a travel mug, and I walked out to the common lawn. The market was in full swing by the time I arrived. Vendors called out to passers-by. Children ran between the stalls. A folk duo was setting up on the portable stage. And in front of my smokehouse, a line of people waited to check in, get maps, and buy raffle tickets from a woman sitting behind the folding table that Patricia had placed inside my building. Patricia saw me approaching and her expression flickered. Surprise, then annoyance, then a practiced smile. "Mr. Mercer," she said, walking toward me with her clipboard. "I'm glad you decided to join us. As you can see, the market is a tremendous success. I hope you're not here to cause a scene." "I'm not here to cause a scene," I said. "I'm just here to observe." She studied me for a moment, clearly suspicious, but she was too busy to interrogate me further. "Well, enjoy the market, and please don't interfere with the vendors." She turned and walked away, already calling out to someone about the raffle prize display. I stood near the retention pond, sipping my coffee, and waited. At 8:45 a.m., a dark blue sedan with government plates pulled into the overflow parking area near the community mailbox. A man in a gray suit got out, carrying a leather briefcase and a camera. He looked around, spotted the smokehouse, and began walking toward it. I recognized him from the photo on the State Historic Preservation Office website, Thomas Park. Patricia noticed him immediately. She intercepted him before he reached the smokehouse, her clipboard held in front of her like a shield. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice bright and officious. "Are you a vendor? Check-in is at the community booth." Thomas Park smiled politely. "I'm not a vendor. I'm Thomas Park, State Historic Preservation Office. I'm here to conduct a site inspection of the Mercer Smokehouse." Patricia's smile froze. "I'm sorry. The what?" "The Mercer Smokehouse." He gestured toward the little brick building. "The structure behind you. It's listed in the State Heritage Inventory. I received a report of unauthorized alterations, and I need to inspect the site." Patricia's face went through several expressions in quick succession: confusion, disbelief, dawning horror. "There must be some mistake. This building is a community asset. It's been used by the HOA for... It's private property," Thomas said calmly. "Listed as a contributing agricultural structure of historical significance. The listing was submitted by the previous owner, Mrs. Eleanor Mercer, in 1998. Any alterations, modifications, or changes to the structure require owner approval and Heritage Office review." "May I ask who authorized the installation of this banner and the new door latch?" Patricia's mouth opened and closed. She looked at the smokehouse. She looked at the banner. She looked at the line of people waiting to check in. She looked at me. I raised my coffee mug in a small salute. "Mr. Mercer," Thomas said, turning to me, "are you the current owner of the property?" "I am," I said. "Daniel Mercer. We spoke on the phone." "Yes, of course." He nodded. "I'll need to document the alterations, the screw holes in the door frame, the new latch, any other changes that have been made without your approval." "Wait," Patricia said, and her voice had gone high and tight. "Wait. This is a farmer's market. We have vendors. We have visitors. You can't just..." "Ma'am," Thomas said, "I'm not shutting down your market. I'm conducting a heritage inspection. But I should inform you that unauthorized alterations to a listed heritage structure can result in significant penalties, including fines and mandatory restoration costs. And if the structure is being used for commercial purposes without the owner's consent, that's an additional violation." The woman sitting at the check-in table had stopped handing out maps. The vendors in the nearby stalls had stopped talking. The folk duo on the stage had stopped tuning their instruments. A circle of silence was spreading outward from the smokehouse, and in the center of it, Patricia Bellingham was coming apart. "This is ridiculous," she said, but her voice cracked on the last word. "This is an old shed. It's been sitting here for 80 years. It's practically a listed heritage structure," Thomas said. "And it's practically on private property. And it's practically been damaged without the owner's permission. There's nothing ridiculous about it, Ms. Bellingham. This is a serious matter." He turned to me. "Mr. Mercer, would you be willing to provide a statement regarding the unauthorized alterations?" "I would," I said. "I have documentation." I opened my satchel and pulled out the folder. I have photos of the original door frame, photos of the screw holes, a certified copy of the plat showing the building on my property, a copy of the HOA permit application falsely claiming the building as a community booth, and a copy of the heritage listing certificate. I handed the folder to Thomas. He opened it and began flipping through the pages. Patricia watched him, and I watched her. Her face had gone pale. Her clipboard hung forgotten at her side. The newspaper reporter, who had been covering the market, had drifted closer and was now taking notes. "Ms. Bellingham," Thomas said, looking up from the folder, "did you or the HOA authorize the drilling of holes in the original 1937 door frame?" It was just a latch. It was an improvement. "Did you have the owner's permission?" Patricia looked at me. I looked back at her. "No," she said finally. "We didn't ask permission. We didn't think we needed to." Thomas closed the folder. "I'll be filing a report with the State Preservation Board. You'll be receiving a formal notice of violation. The HOA will be responsible for the cost of restoring the doorframe to its original condition, as well as any fines assessed by the board. And I strongly recommend that you cease all use of the structure immediately." "But the market," Patricia started. "The market can continue on the common lawn," Thomas said. "But the check-in booth will need to be relocated. This building is not a community asset. It's a private heritage structure, and it's been damaged. I suggest you find a folding table and set it up somewhere else." The silence that followed was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. Patricia Bellingham, president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association, stood in the middle of her carefully orchestrated farmers market, surrounded by vendors and neighbors and a newspaper reporter and a state heritage officer, and she had absolutely nothing to say. The check-in woman started packing up her raffle tickets. The vendors nearest the smokehouse began whispering to each other. Someone, I think it was Elena, who had arrived with her tote bag and was watching from the edge of the crowd, started clapping. A few other people joined in. Patricia turned on her heel and walked away, her clipboard clutched to her chest, her cream-colored blazer catching the morning sun. She didn't stop walking until she reached her white Mercedes, and then she got in and drove away. The market continued, but it wasn't the triumphant event Patricia had envisioned. The check-in booth was hastily relocated to a folding table near the portable stage. The vendors who had heard the exchange spread the story to the vendors who hadn't. The newspaper reporter interviewed Thomas Park, then interviewed me, then took photos of the screw holes in the doorframe. By noon, half the neighborhood knew what had happened, and by evening, the story was on the local news website under the headline, "HOA President Damages Historic Smokehouse for Farmers Market Booth." The aftermath unfolded over the following weeks. The State Preservation Board issued a formal notice of violation to the Willow Creek Homeowners Association, citing unauthorized alterations to a listed heritage structure. The board assessed a fine of $2,500 and ordered the HOA to pay for professional restoration of the doorframe by a qualified historic preservation contractor. The restoration cost $4,800. Patricia resigned as HOA president 3 days after the market. She sent an email to the board citing personal reasons, but everyone knew the real reason. Frank the accountant took over as interim president, and his first act was to cancel the farmers market program entirely. The vendors who had signed up for future dates were notified that the market was discontinued, and several of them were reportedly furious about the deposits they had paid. The HOA's insurance company, which had been notified of the heritage violation, informed the board that their liability policy did not cover intentional damage to historic structures. The restoration costs and fines would have to come out of the HOA's operating budget, which meant a special assessment for all 48 homeowners. I received several angry phone calls from neighbors who blamed me for the assessment, but I also received a dozen thank you notes from neighbors who were glad to see Patricia gone. Elena brought me a casserole. The newspaper reporter wrote a follow-up article about the importance of heritage preservation. And Thomas Park from the State Historic Preservation Office sent me a letter confirming that the Mercer Smokehouse would remain on the heritage inventory, with updated documentation, including the photos I had provided, and a note about the 2023 restoration. I hired the preservation contractor myself, using the money the HOA was required to pay. He removed the brass latch, filled the screw holes with matching oak plugs, sanded and refinished the door frame, and applied a protective sealant that would preserve the wood for another 80 years. He also installed a new lock, a heavy iron deadbolt with a key that only I possessed. When the work was done, I hung my great-aunt Margaret's photo back on the wall. I placed my mother's brass heritage plaque on a small stand next to it, and I installed a small shelf where I put Aunt Margaret's recipe box, the one I had kept in my kitchen drawer for years. It belonged in the smokehouse. It had always belonged in the smokehouse. The last thing I did was hang a small framed sign on the outside of the door. It wasn't a no trespassing sign or a private property sign. It was a simple brass plate engraved with the words, Mercer Smokehouse, CUS 1937, Margaret and Henry Mercer, builders. I stood back and looked at the little brick building. The morning sun was hitting the slate roof, and the dew was still on the grass, and somewhere down the street a neighbor was walking their dog. The smokehouse looked exactly as it had when I was a child, standing in the backyard while Aunt Margaret told me stories about hogs and hams in winters long past. I went inside, closed the heavy oak door behind me, and stood in the quiet. The iron hooks still hung from the ceiling beams. The brick walls still bore the faint smoke stains from decades of curing fires. The recipe box sat on its shelf, waiting. I didn't need to smoke a ham. I didn't need to cure bacon. I just needed the building to be there, intact, respected, remembered. And it was. I locked the door, walked back to the house, poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, and sat on the back porch. The folder of documents was on the table beside me, but I didn't open it. I didn't need to. The case was closed, the smokehouse was safe, and somewhere across town, Patricia Bellingham was probably drafting a resignation letter for whatever board she had joined next. I took a sip of coffee and watched the sun climb higher over the retention pond. It was going to be a beautiful day,